All right, welcome to another episode of Pitch Deck Insights. We're going to do an episode where we don't review a deck, but we dive into terminology. It's super important to get the fundamentals accurate before even understanding a pitch deck. Just again to reconcile, so I'm Litan, your host, co-founder and CEO advisor, and with me is Mike Arndorfer, and together we're going to dive into investing better. And this, again, episode is going to be more about terminology. And so I wanted this time to talk about the people we invest with, right? So we've talked about this throughout some episodes, and I think it would be great to dive into sort of the different terminology for the GPs, the sponsors, the syndicators, the operators, the capital raisers. Like there's all these different names for people we invest with. And so I think it's important to clarify who these people are. There's nothing bad or good about like who they are, just to understand their position in the partnership. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So who would you want to hear is the person you're investing with? Which one of those like terms that I talked about a second ago?
Well, the most important one to me is the operator, the person that's going to be actually running the project, making the decisions, and especially after it's purchased, running it.
So the operator is something that we've spoken a bit about. And again, some people call them the sponsor, whereas sometimes the sponsor isn't necessarily the operator. Right. I think it's important, right? Yeah, so the way I see it, the operator is the one who actually, has boots on the ground with the property management firm, locating the assets, operating the assets, like fully responsible for everything that's happening there. Whereas the sponsor, who some people might consider also the operator, isn't necessarily the operator, the boots on the ground, right? Because a sponsor can also be the partner of the operator who's in charge of fundraising. These might be two separate organizations, right? That the sponsor, they might co-sign on the loan. That's why they're sponsoring it. But they have nothing to do with like the actual operation, location of the property, or all that stuff, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things that you need to know who's going to be running things. Like I remember a guy was pitching to me as though he kind of had this deck set up as though he was the operator, but he really wasn't. When you got into it, he was paying an asset manager to do the asset management, and he was paying a property manager to manage the individual properties. And you're right, he wasn't really involved after buying it with that day in and day out running things, which in that case, you'd want to make sure that you felt comfortable with who was. And typically, I would say that would be a strong yellow, if not red for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, all right. So we have the operator, which we understand is the person or organization that is, direct operator of the property, communicating with the property manager and, all the deals, the day-to-day operations of it. Then there's a sponsor, the syndicator, sometimes the capital raiser, which are people that might be involved in some of the operations, but they're not the core person or business that does it. They might be adjacent to them. They might just be a partner for the capital raising part of it. It's really important to understand anyone who calls themselves that, what the position is in the deal, in the partnership.
Yeah, sometimes they're just involved initially, and then they're really not involved day to day afterwards. And other times they're going to be involved, somewhat through the project. Oftentimes you'll see a capital raiser is just raising money for another group, and then that's their relationship. They maybe are getting cut in on part of the GP or something, but they're not really involved ongoing in day-to-day operations with the group afterwards. And other times they are, but you just want to understand what that relationship is. And like as we've gone through some of these decks, especially the first couple that had two people listed, two different companies, we try to figure out what's that relationship and who's involved and how are you
right.
Who's going to keep running it.
All right, so the capital raiser, and this is also important, it's not a wrong or bad thing to invest with a capital raiser. Like we spoke about this in a previous episode about, a feeder fund, and essentially a feeder is basically that capital raiser, right? Because they're helping raise capital for a deal. They might put together a feeder. They might get part of the GP like you mentioned. That's fine because they negotiated good deal terms or minimum tickets or whatever it is. But it's important to emphasize that they are not the operator. A red flag would be if the capital raiser doesn't tell the LP who the operator is. That's a red flag, right? And I've seen people who will not disclose who they're investing with.
Really?
And that's like crazy.
What's
Like,
the
why?
justification?
The justification is they don't want you to go over their head and invest directly with them.
Yeah.
But if that's a justification, then there's no need for you. You are literally not bringing any value. It's like, what's the point? And so I'm not saying it's bad to invest with a capital raiser. They usually get better terms. They do a lot of due diligence on a deal that you probably would not do. They, like you'd mentioned at some point, like they go see the actual properties, meet the managing partners and all that. And so it's important to understand the terminology. All right, so we have the operator. We have the
Yeah.
syndicate.
Well, just related to that, you really do need to dig into what kind of deal they get, because I recently looked at a deal where I was talking directly to the operator, and then I knew a capital raiser had worked with them too, and it was a co deal where there was going to be two operators and they were splitting it, and operator one was working with this capital raiser. Operator two, I was talking to directly, and I sort of like went back and was just assuming talking directly I would get as good or better deal. But actually, the capital raiser had a much better deal through the other operator, and being like a raising capital for them than I was being offered looking directly at the operator. And so that comes up. The other times it's the other way around, where they're not adding anything, and maybe it's even worse, but it can go either way.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so we have the operator, we have the syndicator, sponsor, capital raiser. They might be different functions, but it's important to emphasize sometimes the operator might also be the capital raiser. Sometimes the operator is all of the above, like they just do everything. They have a team inside that does every component of that. It's just important really to understand the functions of all of those people before investing. Now, there's another term that is general, but it encompasses all this, and that's we should have maybe started with that. That's the whole GP, the general partner. And some people consider this a person, an organization, or whatever, but essentially that's a legal, technical term for the partnership. There's a general partner, the GP, and there's a limited partner, the LP. Now, the way I see it, the GP is basically can consist of everyone we just mentioned. The GP can be the operator, the sponsor, the syndicator, the capital raiser can all be part of this GP, this general partnership, whereas the LP, the limited partners, have different rights, liabilities, as opposed to the GP, right? The GPs will be the ones maybe signing on the loan documents, the closing documents, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, I've seen it where you've got a deal where you've got one person is the GP and they're doing all of the roles. They're doing all of it combined. Or sometimes it's multiple people. Sometimes, like we said, there's different companies involved where they're partnering together to work on it. So, but you as the LP understanding who's involved and what their relationships are is important.
Exactly, and it just might be that the capital raiser is part of the GP because they brought more money to the table, and then they just get a cut of the profits, and that might be just where it ends for them. They don't have any more like aspects of the GP other than just sharing the profits and the fees. And so it is really important to understand, where the line goes through in terms of all the people we're working with. There's another term that isn't heard as often, maybe more often recently, and that's the whole term of a KP, a key partner. And a key partner is basically, someone who has the ability to probably bring value to the deal, but either doesn't want to be part of the GP from a liability standpoint, or the other GPs don't want him to be part of the deal because of profit share standpoint or something like that. And sometimes the KP has more benefits to the LPs. And many times that's reserved for people that, help raise money. Have you seen KPs recently?
Yeah, the two things I usually think of for a KP is, one is if your operator is fairly new to it, and let's say they're trying to get, they've done a couple of multifamily deals before, but they've never done a big one, and this is their first big deal, and they're trying to get like a Fannie Freddie loan or something. They're not going to be able to get it without a KP that has done it before, knows what's going on, and they need to sign on and sort of take care of it. So sometimes it's sort of like the adult in the room or the mentor, experienced person that's on the team to allow you to get financing or something that you couldn't get on your own. The other thing I see is sometimes the KP will come in for their balance sheet, where they are you as the operator maybe are newer and don't have enough net worth to be able to kind of sign on a personal guarantee and have the bank be comfortable with it. So then you can bring a KP in and give them a portion of the GP's shares just for signing on the loan and saying, yeah, I'm going to be responsible for this. And if things go bad, you can come after me personally.
Right. Cool. I mean, again, we don't see it that often, but it's out there. It's not as common as just a common GP-LP relationship. But when you hear the word KP or key partner, it's important for you to know what that means. You usually won't see it in pitch decks. It just will be off the record or on the record, but not in a pitch deck per se. But I think that sums up sort of the operator, the whole stack of syndicator, sponsor, capital raiser that has a lot of like overlap. And then we have the GP and the LP. And in the middle, we have that KP, which is important to understand. I think that sort of sums up the whole definition of the partners, the people, the organization involved in these deals. Is there anyone else we should mention?
No, I think that covers it.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, that was a quick episode just to run down and make sure we're all aligned on what these terms mean. As usual, give us a subscribe. Follow us up on our next episode when we dive into more pitch decks and more information that'll help you all be better investors. So invest smartly, and we'll see you next time.